There is a clear correlation between the manner in which Christopher sees the world, his worldview, on the one hand, and the manner in which he tells his story in The Curious Incident on the other. So what kind of person is Christopher? Well, clearly Christopher is somebody who craves order. And he associates order with such qualities as logic, rationality, clarity, honesty, and truthfulness. And this conforms with his belief in how the universe as a whole is put together or structured. Now, Christopher makes it very clear he does not believe in a God or any other kind of guiding force, but he does nonetheless believe that life and nature are put together in accordance with rational principles. He's a little bit, in a way, like those people from the 17th and I think to a degree 18th century as well, who they did believe in God, but they saw God as a kind of clockmaker, somebody who had made the universe as a sort of logical, coherent mechanism, had set it in motion, and then withdrawn. Now, as I say, Christopher himself does not believe in any kind of God, but his notion of the universe is rather like this. It's like a finely tuned watch which moves according to and proceeds according to rational mechanical processes. So because of this, Christopher sees nature, the universe, but also life itself as something very orderly and well structured. There are a lot of things we don't know about it, there's a lot of things we don't understand, but this is what makes it a puzzle. And Christopher likes these kinds of puzzles. He's a bit like the character in the picture on the screen, where he's aware that there are gaps in the puzzle, but he believes that if you use rational thought or scientific methods, you will, in theory at least, be able to find the answer to individual questions and therefore plug the gaps in your knowledge. So as all a part of this, Christopher has a very objective view of truth and reality. Truth is something that is out there in the universe. It's objective. It's not something subjective. It's not something personal to us. It's not that there's something that's true for one person but not for another, or true in one circumstance but not in another. For him, truth is universal and objective. And this all comes out of his notion, or conforms with his notion, that nature and the universe have been put together or operate according to very rational principles. Now, the problem for Christopher, of course, is that daily life as he experiences it is not like this. It does not fit this picture. Daily life does not generally answer his need for order, for rationality, for clarity, for honesty or truthfulness. Instead, for Christopher, as I think for most of us, life can often seem to be messy. It can be confusing and even deceitful. And for Christopher, this problem mainly comes down to his fellow human beings and the way they behave, because they, in his view, are not like him. They don't behave in rational ways. They do not say what they mean. They often act in ways that do not seem to have any rational basis to them. So Christopher, of course, responds to this by doing his best to try to place some order upon the world in which he lives. He has very clear routines, rules and regulations, and these govern his relationships to other people. Although, of course, part of his system for protecting himself is to remain quite isolated. He likes being on his own, and you perhaps recall his favourite dream is either one in which he's in a spacecraft all by himself, or even better, he's on the earth, but everybody has died, everybody has gone away, so he doesn't have to relate to other people. Now, as I said, he does have relations with people in the book. In the first half, of course, his father is a very visible presence. And they manage to have a good relationship for as long as they are both adhering to a set of agreed rules. And it's when his father breaks the cardinal rule in Christopher's eyes, his father turns out to be a liar, somebody who does not tell the truth, then Christopher is willing to believe all kinds of things of him, that he's actually dangerous, that he could be out to kill Christopher. So in general then, Christopher tries to impose order on his world, to create a system that makes sense to him and makes it possible for him to function and live. And this involves drawing clear boundaries, clear distinctions between things. For example, he doesn't like foods of different colours touching one another on his plate. He likes to keep things separate in their own categories. Now all this way of looking at and trying to live in the world is reflected in his story. It's reflected not only in the things he tells us, or his interpretations of particular events or people, but it's conveyed to us through the manner in which he tells his story, the narrative techniques he employs. For example, just as he believes that the world, the universe, is structured in a clear and orderly manner, and that's how he wishes people to communicate with him, so too does his book, his writing style, share these qualities. His sentences tend to be quite short, the language is often simple and not obviously unambiguous, it is clear, and its goal is to convey information. You may have noticed actually that one of his quirks as a writer, and we'll talk about the quirks in a later video, is that he often begins his sentences with conjunctions like then or above all and. If you look at the final pages of the book, pretty much every sentence begins with an and. And this in itself reflects Christopher's view on the world. He likes to line everything up, to give everything a clear order. And if you use words like then, it establishes a clear connection between things. First this, then this, then this, then this. And it's similar with and. He wants to assert how things fit together. There's a clear parallel between how Christopher tries to place order in the world and make sense of it, and how he uses language in his book. And it's a language of connections, of one thing following on from another. Now another striking feature of his narrative, which I think reflects his worldview, is his use of pictures. And this tells us a number of things about Christopher and how he understands the world. First of all, just as with language, we can ask what kind of language does he use, so too can we ask the same question of pictures. What kind of pictures does he draw, does he present us with? Well, again, they're usually very clear. They are maps, they are graphs, they are diagrams. Their goal is to convey information, to try and tell us something in a clear and direct manner. So Christopher, it does have a visual imagination. He does create pictures of things in his head, but they need to be very clearly defined, easily accessible images. And this is why he avoids writing his book, in his view, like in the manner that many novels are written. It's more scientific work by his understanding of that term. So he criticizes novelists who write things such as, I am veined with iron, with silver, and with streaks of common mud. For Christopher, this doesn't convey any clear information. He cannot get a clear picture in his head of what this would look like. It's just muddled and confusing for him. And he doesn't want any of that. He wants his language to be simple, clear and direct. This is why he will say, for example, that he can accept similes, but he cannot accept metaphors. Now, a simile is a comparison that uses the word like. One of the ones Christopher gives us is his nostrils looked as if there were two mice sitting inside them. And because similes use like, they are telling us that they are making a comparison. They are not confusing this man's nostrils with mice. And as Christopher explains, a simile works because it's only pointing to a very specific comparison, and it gives you a clear picture. So in Christopher's view, saying his nostrils looked as if they had mice up them, you get a sense of how hairy they are. That's all a simile is saying. It's not saying that this man's nostrils like running around the skirting boards. It's not saying that his nostrils like having cheese, or that cats chase his nose around the kitchen. And that's how Christopher would understand it were it a metaphor. In a metaphor, you get rid of the like or as if, and you treat one thing as if it were in fact the other. He had two mice on the front of his face is more literal, if you like, than a simile. And Christopher doesn't like this then, because metaphors very often compare two seemingly very different things. They confuse the categories, they cross and mix over the boundaries. Now this is one reason why neuroscientists and others believe that studying great literature and great art is good for our brains, because great literature and art does tend to compare unlikely things, and this apparently triggers all kinds of things in our brains and makes us much better at connecting unlikely things and perceiving, for example, unity beneath them. So there is a scientific view that metaphors are very, very good for us. But Christopher is very much against that. It's like mixing different coloured foods on your plate. It's confusing things, and therefore it's upsetting. So in other words, Christopher has a very clear idea about how the universe is structured, but also how he wants his life to fit together, how he wants the world to be and his place to be in it. And he wants the world to be orderly and well structured, and he wants everything to proceed according to rational, logical principles, and he wants qualities such as honesty and truthfulness to be important in this world. And therefore he likes forms of writing that seem to share these qualities. He likes writing that is scientific, that is rational, that is clear, that is unambiguous. And if writing has that qualities, for Christopher, this makes it real or realistic, but it above all makes what you say is true. And this is why in Christopher's view, use of myth, metaphors, or these kinds of things is equivalent to telling a lie. It's disorderly and it's deceptive.